shit, very cynical, but can't really argue with that. And then I was just thinking, like, why should he be politically engaged? Because what's the easiest way for him to learn about politics? Turn on the TV. What is he going to get from the TV? Jack shit. He's working like a dog to survive. Like, he doesn't have that much time. It makes total sense that people would be politically ignorant because it's so hard to find good sources of information. You're not going to get that on TV or radio or newspapers.
Yeah, that's well said, Peter. We are live, by the way. I started out like that's a good way to start off, guys. Thank you for watching. We are live again. Thank you guys for checking out the New Left podcast. We have my friend Karim Bettache and Peter Beattie. Hopefully I said that correctly.
Beattie.
Pete, we can go with Pete. Awesome. I appreciate you guys for joining. Karim is a return guest. He brought it last time, and we're gonna have a good time with this conversation. Welcome to Fred Hampton Leftists, Karim and Pete.
Yes. Hi, Nick. Good to be here again.
Hey, guys.
So this is a collaboration because we had our conversation. We share, and I learned about your channel, and obviously I love the focus that you have, because my main focus when it comes to covering politics is covering the class war, state violence, foreign policy, and then your kind of focus is exactly my line and what I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in a lot of theater, like that's what a lot of people kind of focus on. But that's I'm a nerd. That's what I'm into, and that led me to becoming an anti-imperialist activist. But for the people who are not familiar, who probably missed the first interview with us, Karim, can you get a breakdown? And then we go to Pete, okay, he's new to the show, and then we can get some introduction to his work. Because you just read an amazing piece about the IPCC report, and we're gonna go over that here very soon. But Karim, you want to start us off? Tell our audience about your work and the message that you want to promote tonight.
So I am Karim Bettache. Some of your audience will know me. I work as a professor in Hong Kong in the Department of Global Political Economy. I'm specialized in political, cultural, and social psychology. And my interests are the way empire, but also colonialism, white supremacy, all these large-scale cultural effects of 500 years of colonial domination by Europeans, how that shapes our psychology, how that shapes our everyday life, and the way we perceive each other, the way we perceive everyone else. And actually, this is also something that is part of my radical side. This has radicalized me. This understanding of the world and made me somebody who has a strong wish to eradicate everything that is related to that system. That system of, I will always say, white supremacist, imperialist racism. Something that I there's nothing more that I wish that it's gone. You know what I mean? But I won't go on too much. Peter, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Peter Beattie. I also work with Karim, same program. My focus has been on basically why people believe what they believe about politics. And so my focus has been on the kind of intersection between media and politics, and how our psychology, all of these biases that we have, affect the way that we learn. But also not just our biases, but also the supply of information provided to us by media systems, and how that ends up with the total, shithole situation that we're in today.
So yeah, and that's very interesting that your work is focused on how people end up with their political opinions. Because I can speak as someone who obviously been born and raised in the American Midwest, which is largely conservative, highly propagandized, to the point where people don't even question the amount of money we spend on the U.S. war machine, despite the fact that our communities literally have been sucked dry. And this is a problem that is way too obvious to me. And what you guys focus on, and why this conversation is so important, is because this is a very important path towards liberation, staying in solidarity and creating an international left to fight these forces of oppression. And at Fred Hampton Leftists, we want to focus on connecting the problems of militarism, because as an American, it's very easy to forget about the crimes of the U.S. empire. But it's important to acknowledge that these things are connected. The U.S. empire, the police that we are under, the capitalist system that keep us oppressed. So that's why when you highlight white supremacy with foreign policy, that's such an important distinction. Do you want to add a little bit to that, Kareem? And why do you think calling out imperialism as white supremacy is so important? Is that your take?
Yeah. So maybe we can all discuss a bit what radicalized us. I think that's an interesting way to go for this conversation. And I will just start with what really radicalized me. So why do I always focus so strongly on white supremacy? You know, like it sounds almost like a trendy topic right now, but I already did it many, many years ago, even when I was quite young, actually. And that is because, don't forget, I am half Algerian, half Dutch. Okay, I'm born in the Netherlands. I'm culturally Dutch. My mother is Dutch, so I'm half white, half North African. You know what I mean? So I always say this is a very important part of my radicalization, because I grew up in a white family. My mom, my stepdad, and my sister, they're all white. I went regularly to my dad, who was Algerian. So I grew up switching frames. So seeing the world through white eyes and seeing the world through non-white eyes. So you actually get two lenses through which you see the world. And these two lenses have shown me how important whiteness and white supremacy is in the way our world works. The way you are as an oppressed person, but also the way you look at other human beings out of your white lens. You know what I mean? And this showed me so how important this is in everything we see around us, whether it's movies, whether it's war, capitalism. And it started when I was a little boy. You know, when I was a very little boy, maybe 5, 6 years old, I always wondered, why are black and brown people always the bad guys in movies? Okay, when I watched Hollywood movies. Why? Hi there, Robin. Why are black and brown guys always bad? Or they die first, or they are the sidekicks. I noticed this when I was a young boy already. And I remember asking my white mother, like, why is that? And she had never noticed. This is the interesting thing. A lot of people never notice that stuff. And what happened was I grew up watching these movies, growing up in the Dutch culture, which is a white supremacist culture. And in my teenage years, you know what happened? I actually was a bit of ashamed of my other part, you know, my Algerian part. So I try to hide it sometimes, you know, because for many people I can pass, you know what I mean? And this made me realize Malcolm X's words. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Who taught you to hate yourself? I don't know if you know that quote from Malcolm X. Who taught you to hate yourself? And I realized this is culture. This doesn't come from me. This doesn't come from my mom. This doesn't come from my dad. This comes from my culture. And of course, you're a teenager. You have insecurities. You grow out of it. I grew out of it, luckily. Then Iraq War happened, where I literally saw the Hollywood Orientalism in real life. Anti-Muslim, anti-Arab, anti-this, bombing people in the Middle East, killing more than 1.5 million people, nobody caring about it. And I realized at that moment how powerful Hollywood has been in dehumanizing Arabs and Muslims, that nobody gave a damn, you know. And of course, I cannot generalize. There were, of course, people who cared, but in general, it never evoked the same outrage as, for example, a terrorist attack on European soil. So this already radicalized me a lot. And then I went into academia to try and understand the more theoretical and psychological aspects of the world we are living in. I wanted to understand this psychologically, okay? So I went around the world, and this even radicalized me even more, because I lived in Hong Kong, lived in Malaysia, and what I realized is, shit, white supremacy is not just Europe. White supremacy is everywhere. You know, like if you come in Malaysia, a former colonized society, Hong Kong, a former colonized society, everywhere you see the norm is whiteness, and everything that deviates from the white norm is in some way, shape, or form not at the same level as whiteness. And in fact, the darker you go, the lower the standing. and the ravage you see in Malaysia and the different racial groups all discriminating each other, I realized, wow, this stuff is global. This stuff is everywhere. And the only way we can finally start decolonizing is by understanding our commonality. You, Nick, your audience, Peter, me. We all are grown up in white supremacist culture. We all suffer racism and discrimination. We all suffer under capitalism. We all suffer under unfairness based on your features, whether it's religion, gender, race, and this is just something that made me realize, like, okay, we cannot just stick to our own bubble anymore. But that's maybe for later. This is a bit what radicalized me, and what did I do? I use my position as a professor and a lecturer to actually also wake people up, my students, my colleagues, you know what I mean? And try people to understand, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? A lot of people, like Malcolm X, his words are so profound, saying, who taught you to hate yourself? This suddenly wakes you up. And this is the same that the power you, Peter, as a professor, me as a professor have by actually teaching our students, like, hey, wait a minute. Think about the psychology behind everything that you see every day. U.S. imperialism, the way that's being spoken about other groups, and so forth. Okay, but before I go on too long, why don't you tell us your radicalization, Peter?
Sure. So I'm probably like the weirdest one of the bunch here, because I was raised in like a trad Cath family, so it's like traditional Catholic. The Catholics that are more Catholic than the Pope. And so, like, the good thing about that is that in that religion, like, you're taught from an early age, all humans are of equal, infinite value. So there is, like, the Catholic, the word, it also means universal or worldwide. So that was like the good thing. But then the bad thing is, because abortion is such an issue in Catholicism, my parents and a lot of Catholics in the US ally with the Republican Party, because it's like, okay, abortion is the biggest issue ever. It's the exact same thing as shooting somebody dead on the street. So I'm going to go with the party that's against, mass murder. So then they end up adopting all of the other aspects, all the other ideological parts of that party. So I was actually first politically radicalized, I guess you could say, by Rush Limbaugh. I don't know if Nick, you know who that is? Yeah, people.
Yeah,
he's dead now.
I got a lot to say when I share my radicalization story, but he plays a big part, especially with my age group. But go ahead, Pete.
So I was like 12 and I was listening to his show and I was like, oh my God, this is so entertaining. Then I got into National Review and First Things and all of these kind of right-wing sources. But then when I was a teenager, I got the internet. And so I was starting to like debate with people, talk with people on news groups and chat rooms and whatnot. And I started to realize I couldn't defend my beliefs against some arguments, right? Like, it was like, these are just weak. And so my whole ideology kind of started to crumble. One piece broke and then the whole thing fell apart. So then I realized, okay, I've got to build up an ideology from scratch now. And so that experience of having like your whole worldview crumble, which is extremely painful, and then having to build up a new one, that got me fascinated about just that question: why do people believe what they believe about politics? And so basically, I've just spent my whole life up until now trying to figure that out. I think I have it figured out, but to really have leverage on what people believe about politics, you have to have mass media. Because information is physical. We think of information as something like ethereal. It's out in the air somehow. We don't think seriously about it enough. But when we realize information is always physical, it's always instantiated in some sort of physical medium, whether it's a book, our sound waves that we're producing right now, the data we're getting from the internet, et cetera. Then we have to think about the distribution system, the infrastructure, the logistics for information. And right now in the US and in many parts of the world, that logistical system to distribute information is dominated by basically the center right to the far right.
Yeah, exactly.
That is well said, and it's very interesting whenever I talk to someone who come from what I would call personally a extreme right position, like the socially conservative Catholic Church.
I'd call it
Because
that too.
yeah, so because I always want to reframe issues. I don't like using what they call themselves. I tell people what it is, and I can back it up in many ways. And that actually kind of ties in how I was radicalized as well, because the black community, especially in the Midwest, I live in Missouri, is very socially conservative, and a lot of people don't really understand that. Now, there has been a lot of change over the last maybe 10, 15 years, especially more recently, maybe 5 to 8 years. But growing up, I thought even then I thought I was more liberal than what I was, but I wasn't. I still remember in the black community, and I still kind of see it to this day. There's a lot of homophobia. And I mean, there's a lot of things I used to say. I mean, I like the F word with the ends with a G, and I didn't even think and things I didn't even think it was that bad because everyone said it in my community, and I want to admit that, and I deeply apologize, obviously, to anyone of the LGBTQ community for even speaking like that. But you understand, I supported gay marriage, and I remember I think that was my first liberal radical, because I was like, y'all support gay marriage, boom. I thought that was like the biggest thing, because no, in the black community, that was no one supported that. In California, they fought against propositions to legalize gay marriage. So I remember one of my first radical positions was like, all right, I'm tired of the black church and them trying to hold down gay people, because um, I saw the connection between the discrimination of gay people and I'm not saying the same tier, I'm not saying the exact same thing, but there's obviously a connection when you see people who are being discriminated because who they love versus being discriminated through the skin color. And all black kids, especially in my generation or anyone growing up, really, when they learn about slavery, it's painful. Like people don't. I don't know if white people or anyone else and who don't have that historical trauma understand. I still remember in school, I still have conversations with people like, man, like it was literally devastating when we hear that our people was enslaved, our people was brutally lynched. We had our black women that was experimented on in the most horrific ways. And so that kind of radicalized me as well, that combination. So I connected the two. I'm like, okay, how can we complain about racism, but we are anti-gay bigots? That doesn't make sense. So even with me having that position, I would still say the F word. The thing I'm like, well, I support gay marriage. So I'm like, it's not problematic. But I'm just telling that's the evolution of my thought process. And now, like, obviously, Fred had the leftists. We got multiple LGBTQ hosts, and I learned a lot over the years. And this is part of my development. And I'm proud to say, and this is why I'm open to share these stories, because I know for a fact I'm a true ally of that community, and this is how it changed and grow. Now, to expand even further from that, because now we're talking about the radical right wing. You mentioned right wing radio host. This the ridiculousness of the Republican Party, because I was in high school and I was in middle school, and my development as someone who learned about politics started when George Bush Jr. was president. I don't know, and it seemed like you guys are relatively around my age, but a lot of people who are older and even people that are younger now, they have no idea what that done to my generation. Seeing someone like George Bush, Dick Cheney in charge, and I went to that period, and I always like to explain there's tiers to radicalization, and the first tier is recognizing that Republicans are bad. The second tier is like, oh man, Democrats do the same thing Republicans do. Then the third tier is realize they both work for the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex, and the CIA. There are different levels and tiers of being radicalized as an American. So I'm explaining the first tier I was at. Well, I'm like, okay, George Bush, Dick Cheney, we gotta do everything we can to stop these people. I saw the wars, and this is why I'm gonna discuss this a little bit later to shorten the story. But I use foreign policy to radicalize people because foreign policy radicalized me. Our entire generation saw the Iraq War and the war escalation of George Bush and Dick Cheney, and that started the path to leftism for a lot of us. Even when we thought we was more left than we actually was, we thought we were like, okay, I'm gonna be a leftist, I'm gonna be anti-war, and that was my mindset. And now Barack Obama came in and he killed the anti-war movement, misdirection, and I'll explain this a little bit later. But that's why Democrats are so dangerous; they kill movements. But that fire never left me. But once again, I was misled. I voted for Obama because I thought he was in the wars. And then when I realized he wasn't, once again, being radicalized from the George Bush years, this is why you see young people who oppose Barack Obama now, unlike the black boomers, because they didn't have our same radicalization cycle. So we saw Barack Obama, we learned about his war crimes, and you see black leftists, young people that reject Barack Obama in ways that the older generation not even close to doing. Because I went to support him, he lied. He took 2 wars out of the 7. He bombed more people than George Bush did. He expanded the national security state, literally stole away our Fourth Amendment rights. So he was a disaster. And I didn't let anyone distract me from that. I was like, oh damn, I was wrong. That one I reached tier 2. When you like, damn, Democrats do the same thing Republicans do. And then as I became a leftist, I learned more theory. Then I reached tier 3 when I learned about the national security state, the CIA, the prison industrial complex, the military industrial complex. Because once you learn that, then you learn why the Bushes are like the Obamas, why the Clintons are like the Bushes, for example.
And if I may interrupt you for a moment.
Go ahead. I'll pass it to you.
Yeah. If I interrupt you for a moment, Nick, and the third tier is realizing that it's international. That's not just the US, that it's everywhere. It's in Canada.
3.5. That's like tier 3.5, because I think that takes the next level, because a lot of people that's still behind it, because I want to preach that. That's an important point, Kareem. Maybe 3.5, 4, because honestly, I think that's probably the next level when they realize it's an international show. But go ahead and continue your point.
No, I just that like I think this is one of the most important wake up moments of Americans. We have been a bit more internationalist as Europeans and than you guys, and it's not surprising. I mean, the United States was the center of the world, so you didn't need to care about the rest of the world in the old days. At least, well, let's say for the majority in the United States, you of course had the Pan-Africans and the black radicals in the old days who were very internationalist, which was a very good thing. But the thing is that you see now a wake up among new generation Americans that is not only anti-imperialist, but also finally starts to look across the border and see that we are all in the same boat. Not just because we are all suffering under US imperialism, but because European colonialism has created the racialized capitalist system you see around the world. It doesn't matter if you live in Denmark, Canada, Brazil, Chile, South Africa, Malaysia, or any other place, you are feeling white supremacist capitalism everywhere, and the remnants of European colonialism in every society around the world. If you are black and you live in Denmark, you experience racism. If you are a Muslim, you live in Denmark, you experience racism. If you are Chinese, you live in Denmark, you experience racism. They can all fly to Canada or to the United States, they will experience racism. Why? Because that system of racism is built with one group on top, and the rest are those that can be discriminated against. Okay, that's why we have no examples of systemic discrimination / racism against people classified as white. It doesn't exist because that system was built by Europeans for Europeans. Okay, and it's so important for us to understand how similar our situations are. If you go to my country, the Netherlands, we have black descendants of slaves now fighting to be recognized for the horrendous history of slavery of the Dutch. Okay, thousands and hundreds and thousands of slaves. Apartheid, like I said in your last show, apartheid is a Dutch word. Okay, my ancestors invented it. And we now have political parties with a black lady fighting for equal rights for people of color in the Netherlands. And she gets death threats every day, serious death threats for politely saying that she would love a society with no racism. That's the world we are living in. And you Nick,
see the meltdown with critical race theory in America. That's essentially what we are talking. We outlining just the history of racism and how that connects in our everyday lives. And there's a national meltdown over that. So that ties to your point exactly, doesn't it, Karim?
Exactly, and that is why I always say that leftists and people from people of color or any minority group should never jump on the boat of anti-wokeism. I can understand that you are frustrated by people in the Democratic Party who abuse woke for their own gain. I understand that. It's very annoying. But jumping on the boat and helping the white right, pushing back on anything that is related to anti-racism is very, very unwise. You know? So because woke became an insult, social justice became an insult, critical race theory became an insult, anti-racism became an insult. The right has a way to turn every term related to anti-racism into an insult. And so many leftists are joining in on that game, which is so unwise. I understand, there are people who are abusing identity politics on the left, but choose your battle very, very wisely. And to get back on what I just said, Nick, is that now that's why I watch your show. As a Dutch guy, and working as a professor in Hong Kong, I watch Fred Hampton leftists almost every day. Why? Because I can recognize what you're saying. We are in the same boat. And this is so important for people to understand, that we need to build coalitions across borders, because we are literally struggling the same fight. You know what I mean? Okay, I went on for long enough.
There's so many points. I'm gonna get Pete in here very soon, but you made a point that I think is very important, and I've been starting to make, because we even seen like this anti-wokeness movement that is been. I even seen people that call themselves leftists who repeat this. These are a lot of people who like watch Voss, for example, where they like, oh, you're just using identity politics. Oh, woke politics is hurting us. And this is more evidence of anti-blackness in our discourse, because imagine what they're saying. They are allowing white liberal Democrats to steal a term that came from our community.
Yeah.
Woke? Do you guys understand where that came from? That's a black term.
It's a black term, yeah.
Yeah, that came out for decades. Now, what does that term mean? And I looked this up, and I made this point on my show before. If you look at wokeness and you look at how we used it, essentially means being aware of your surroundings, being able to acknowledge your situation, being able to adjust and move from there. And it's incredible. And this goes to your point about white supremacy. They managed to take something that is a positive thing like that, and you even see Joe Rogan like, oh, we gotta get rid of wokeness. All these people who are very popular in our white supremacist society, they will say wokeness is bad. That's how the black community survived, was through wokeness. But the liberal class managed to hijack that. I want to get Pete's thoughts. I want to have him jump in, and then Karim, you can give your thoughts on where the conversation go from there. But Pete, do you got anything you want to add?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to ask you. You were talking about your background there. Like, I'm going to go ahead and bet any money that you didn't pass these stages of awakening, basically, by watching CNN, MSNBC, and reading the New York Times. So I'm curious, like, what sources were you tuning into so you could get that information?
I'm gonna put it back on you slightly, and this is what I mean by that. You are right. You are not going to be radicalized with those media programs in a conventional sense and thinking that they are real news. But when I hit around tier 1 or 2, they actually radicalized me more. So where I'll see how ridiculous they are. And I learned that they was responsible for pushing the war in Iraq, where they were responsible for pushing the lie of the weapons of mass destruction. And I remember when I was a little bit more moderate, when I, like, during my Obama phase, for example, where I literally had like trust in like corporate news, like if like CNN was on, the MSNBC was on, I was thinking like, okay, I guess they must report information. But they don't understand that they really radicalized our generation, because they went too far, to the point where when I learned that they lying about war, when I learned about they pretty much do cover for weapons manufacturers and complicit and apologizing for genocides, and they apologize for our prison industrial complex system. That's why I'm like when your reality is shooken that much, where you think we have real institutions of news, that actually radicalized me more. I'm like, what is happening? So we have an oligarchy that has a central flow of information, central flow of information they control. So that was like one of the things that helped me get to tier 1 to tier 2. Don't get me wrong, your analysis was point on, but that's why the slight adjustment I'm making, it actually did help me radicalize, because how bad it was. But that's a good point. I'll pass it right back to you, Pete.
So, but you must have had like other sources of information.
Yeah, absolutely.
You would understand, like, okay, like this was a lie, the WMD thing, the whole structure of imperialism, like that you definitely weren't getting from the New York Times. But then once you got that information, you could look at the mainstream media in that other way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talked about this before, and this relates to what you said. I actually was radicalized and became more leftist. I went through a history nerd phase. You know what I mean? And my education, and this is a giant problem in the black community, is trash. And it's getting worse, especially now they in red states. They said we're not going to teach about racism no more. We're not
Right.
really going to teach about the crimes of you. So it's going to get worse. It was already bad in the 90s, in the early 2000s when I grew up. So I literally went through this education system without really knowing our history. And I talked about this on my show before, where they actually misled us. And I asked other people around, so I make sure that I'm like, you went through this as well. They're like, yeah. I remember they painted the picture that Malcolm X, who you quoted multiple times, they painted the picture that Malcolm X was this unhinged radical that was wrong and ineffective in his messaging. And they said MLK is the good one. But you understand how deep that psyop is? Because in order to pull that off, they had to whitewash who MLK was. So it was like a double whammy where they whitewashed MLK and they vilified Malcolm X's name. Now I got into college, and college courses are much different, where there's a baseline education where it's not necessarily great, but it's not as bad as the education we get in the Black community. So I remember I had this history class, and props to this history teacher. I don't remember his name, but it was very intriguing. I never was into history before that, like never, ever, because I thought it was milquetoast and boring. So I took this history class, and I had this great professor. I wish I remembered this. I can shout out, but I don't. He was really good, and he didn't hold back. I learned a lot of stuff in that one class that I never learned, and then it wasn't.
There you go.
And then
that's the power of education, man.
Yeah. So I went on, and I'm a college dropout as well, and there's a lot I can talk about that with, but because I dropped out of college, I'm like, okay, just because I can't finish college don't mean I'm gonna stop my emotional development. That's what lead me to the person I am today. And I'm like, okay, since I became into history, I started reading a ton of history, Black history, the history of war, like the Mongol Empire, the history of imperialism, what the Spanish did in Central America, the CIA, all the countries they overthrew. And I'm 30 years old now. This is age around 22, 26. And this is when I'm like, if you're complicit with this, and when I mean this, I mean the continuation of these horrific things I learned through history, the destruction of people of color and darker skinned people, as you laid out, Karim, their community. If you're complicit with that, I have to fight you, because I was delusional thinking that as a society we advanced and we was beyond this stuff. I used to think that because that's the propaganda they feed you. But then I learned, I'm like, no, we're not. We're not. So then that led me to the path of leftism. I'm passing the train, give you guys thoughts. I got meaning to expand on that, but that kind of lead to that. And because that answered your question about what other mechanism I was radicalized from. Then I distrusted media from there, and then I started listening to a lot of independent media, which why I kind of got into this space I am now, because of criticisms of the American West media. But I get into that a little bit later. I want to pass it back to Karim. Do you have any thoughts you want to add in?
No, I just think that what you said about that professor is a very interesting thing, and I've noticed the same. And once you have that one professor that I always say plants that seed. You know what the amazing thing is? You plant the seed in one mind, and that one mind, like Nick's mind, is planting seeds all over. So it's exponential. I always say this. You know, Nick is the perfect example. I do the same with my students. I teach them in a way. For example, I teach international relations. If you do that in the West, you teach international relations, then it's a pure history of Europe. Seriously, that's international relations. How great we had this Westphalian state system and the European. What do? I teach critical theory. What is critical theory? Decolonial theory or post-colonial theory, feminism, other Marxism. So these are actually more theories that are critical, and it's a very different lens. And I spent a couple of courses on literally white supremacy, how colonialism created white supremacy world. And you will not believe, Nick, the positive reactions I get from students here in Asia. Like, they're like, as if they have an existential crisis and you wake them up, you know? And this is the power, because 50% of my students do their thesis on something related to colonialism, white supremacy, racism. Why? Because this is something they were never allowed to think about while it is in their environment the whole time. But we don't learn about it in the West. You go to Cambridge, you go to whatever, you go to Oxford, Harvard, and you get all that liberal bullshit. You know what I mean? while here, luckily, we also have great universities, but we at least have the freedom to go deeper into the critical part of our social world. And this is amazing because I literally had students sending me letters or emails thanking me for opening their eyes with regards to how that works, our societies and race relations and that kind of stuff, and how it's so prevalent everywhere I was. And this is one of the crucial parts also when we talk about internationalism, Nick. Like, for example, that professor planted seeds, you start the channel and you spread your thoughts. Peter and I, we just recently started a channel. We still have to build our identity, but it's getting there slowly with a lot of support from your viewers as well, which is fantastic. And we also plant those seeds, and every little mind talks to their family, talks to their friends, talks to their colleagues, and plants seeds around them. And this is the way internationalism works, and this is the way you wake the world up. You know what I mean? I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Peter.
Yeah, that's what. Sorry, Peter. If you want to jump in, I can add to that, but you can jump in if you have anything you want to add.
No, you go first.
All right, so I love the term planting seeds, and that is one of my number one strategies of what I do. I mentioned earlier how I use foreign policy to radicalize people, and I said I'll get to that later. I feel like this is a perfect way to kind of segue into that, because I mentioned how I was radicalized, and I told you guys that George Bush and all his illegal wars played a very giant part in that. And the education of the crimes of the U.S. empire is so important when it comes to radicalizing people against the two-party duopoly. What I mean by that, the conventional wisdom in Washington, D.C. is that you don't talk about foreign policy with voters. That's too complex. You got to keep it simple. That's nonsense, guys. This goes to another topic. I don't want to expound too much on it, but the left and a lot of worker movements, anti-imperialist movements, we are given bad advice by people who pretend to be our allies on purpose. And that's just one thing that happened as well, where they say, oh, don't talk about foreign policy. No one cares about that. That is not true. And when historically has that been true? That is ahistorical. Like people in World War II didn't care about the war. Like during people in Vietnam, if your country is being invaded in the 1800s, I don't care about foreign policy. That's nonsense. When has that ever been a thing? So anyway, to continue, when I had these hard conversations, especially with a lot of black people who still like Barack Obama, it was very simple to get these people to not like Barack Obama, because a lot of my people I know are intellectually honest. So when I explain to people that Barack Obama bombed Doctors Without Borders, people I know like, wait, I didn't know that. What? And I'm like, oh, he bombed Africa? Oh, George Bush had 2 wars, but he increased it to 7? He had a kill list? Do you know he literally expanded NSA spying program rights? And I can go on and on and on. Now, if you're intellectually consistent, if you care about justice, how do you hear that stuff and be like, dude, I can't believe you're going against our first black president? No, most people look ridiculous when you do that. There are liberals that do that, and they look ridiculous when they do that. And I'm like, okay, you can do that all you want, but the middle, the people who don't vote, the people we need to feel radicalized, they will see what I'm saying and know that I'm coming from a place where I'm being intellectually honest and you're not. You got anything you want to add, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole word in China to describe that. Like people in the West who claim to be on the left because, they're not bigots when it comes to race. They're not bigots when it comes to LGBT, but they STFU when it comes to foreign policy. Like they don't focus on foreign policy at all. So imagine like you're in
what's the word?
China, Baizoa. So that just means white left. And
here you go, white left.
Yeah. So unfortunately, but Tucker Carlson, the guy that we remember as the bow tie dipshit propagandizing for the Iraq War back in the early 2000s, he did a segment.
He rebranded himself as a fake anti-imperialist. Like he tried to do this rebranding exercise, and he thinks he's not, guys. Like the thing is, like people are so dumb. He's not even anti-imperialist. Like he support the occupation of Palestine. He support overthrowing Venezuela. I don't want to cut you out too much, but like, who fought for that? That's so dumb. But go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, but I mean, you can understand like you're in the global South in any number of countries around the world that have been absolutely brutalized over the past few hundred years, and then you're looking over at the rich countries in the West, and you're like, what is this left that like they care so much about like unisex bathrooms or whatever, like the latest like social issue is, but they don't say a mumbling word about the fact that their own governments are literally murdering people around the world, whether through economic means or directly military means. So they came up with this term, white left, to describe, and you don't have to be white. You can be black, you can be Latino, you can be any race, whatever, ethnicity. But it's this phenomenon of people in the West who don't know anything about foreign policy because our media doesn't talk about it. That you'd have to go on the internet, you'd have to read books like you did. That's the only way you're really going to know anything. So you have this whole class of people who consider themselves to be on the left, and their heart, I think, is in the right place. Like they care for the underdog, they care for the oppressed, they care for the marginalized. But if you don't know anything about foreign policy, and that's why I love when you nail this point, like you have to know about foreign policy if you want to consider yourself on the left. Otherwise, you're going to have 1.4 billion people in China laughing their asses off at you because they can see this absurdity from the other side of the planet.
Yeah, and that also brings me to the whole the climate action, for example, like Greta Thunberg, you know, who doesn't say a word about freaking imperialism, which is the biggest climate destructor next to destroyer of human lives in the world. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
that's that white.
They don't want to lead her in that direction. I honestly believe she means 100% well, but she got people that around her that like, okay, don't ever mention that because
and that is the white bubble. That a lot of people are in the West. You know, that is that white bubble that people are in, and it includes our media systems. I mean, in the Netherlands, I just read an article on one of the papers where I also publish articles sometimes, where this guy is literally saying the title of the article is "We have been indoctrinated too much with regards to the Afghan war." And then I was like, oh, wow. So he's going to talk about US imperialism. And then he says, Afghanistan is more than just the Taliban. And I'm like, not a word about the freaking imperialism. You know, like we've been indoctrinated. There is more than just the Taliban. Yeah, but what about the US being there? You dipshit. You know what I mean? I just can't stand that. And that is the problem a lot of people, but also outside of the West, are suffering from because of our Western dominated media system like Google, YouTube, Facebook, Hollywood, is that everyone gets indoctrinated by this, how can I say that? This pro-Western narrative. And that is why we need something that goes against that system, you know?
Yeah, that was go ahead, Peter.
Oh no, I just saw somebody pointed out like that Greta had talked about the war machine and pollution. Yeah, I just think like she's a teenager, like she did amazing stuff, like, you know, props to her. I just think like her perspective was, I don't want to get into politics. I just want to focus on climate change. But I'm hoping that as she gets older, like she'll realize you can't do that. Like that's impossible. You know,
yeah,
like
I 100%
politics
think she's
and
a
climate
good-faith
change.
actor, and I think it's a fair criticism to say that she should talk about imperialism more. I just think that should be far from our target, but I don't think anyone went too far. I think that's just a substantive criticism. I believe that's not us like mocking her character like you see the right does. The right just attacks her like without any argument.
But her take on Greta Thunberg's take on Israel Palestine is also embarrassing. Is really
I don't
bad.
really know that much about her because
she was two-siding the issue. You know what I mean? And that is frustrating. And again, I don't blame her in person. She is just a victim of our indoctrination. But that is also why I always say that if you want a leader of an activist leftist movement, you need somebody who has multiple oppression identities in him or herself. Let's say black, female, gay, you name it. Why am I saying this? Because when you don't have these oppressions in you, you are often blind to the suffering of other people. That is why I often say, of course I'm not racist, but I often say a leftist movement should not be led by white people. Not anymore. And not because I'm a racist, I'm the opposite. I don't care what you are, white, black, yellow, because I don't care about that color-coded nonsense. But what I'm trying to say is that once you have a lived experience, of being a black man in the United States, or being an Indonesian suffering under colonialism, or being an oppressed Arab Arab woman in Western Europe. You understand the suffering of all the people that suffer under that oppression. You know, as a black Muslim woman, you understand the suffering of indigenous people. You understand the suffering of black people. And that is why I think a person like Greta Thunberg, both citing an issue in Israel-Palestine, it's also partly because she still is born in an identity of privilege in a world, unfortunately, that's still based on whiteness. You know what I mean? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's very interesting. And my criticism would be of a lot of people who I think not focusing on the right problem is I'm glad he brought up the military, because as for Hampton leftist and someone who come from the perspective of the black community, this is something you never hear from the white left at all. Like I reported on my show, I don't have a giant platform, but look at the other platforms. No one reported on this. You guys will know what it was. There was a report that showed the military was polluting. They were dropping toxic dump in disenfranchised communities. Now, the headline alone sounds brutal, but it actually covers up what the real problem. Because let me fix the headline. The United States military is illegally polluting the black community without impunity. You see that? The headline was the military caught dumping toxic waste in disenfranchised community. No, that's too soft. That's too soft. What if you read the story is the United States military is poisoning intentionally with no consequences the black community.
Yeah.
So if you're not anti or war machine, if you are for supportive of giant military budgets like the entirety of the Democratic Party, you cannot claim you are for climate change. You cannot say you're against environmental racism, because there's a lot of dum-dums who are like, what's environmental racism? What is that? What I just laid out. When you got the military literally polluting our community. And then environmental racism leads to corporations poisoning our water. And then that leads to us having health consequences. Our kids, their growth is stunted. Their intellectual capacity is stunted. That happened in Flint, one of the biggest cover-ups in modern American history, which Status Quo does a good job of uncovering. So that's environmental racism. And that's why what you bring up is so spectacular and so amazing, because you have to talk about the military if you're serious about climate change. If you're not serious about climate change. And right now is the time to be serious about climate change. I think this is a great time to share your article, Peter, and I want to get your thoughts on it. This is amazing. We can just quickly skim it, and you can kind of explain your thought process. Let me give me 1 second to share it here. This is from your guys' Substack, which we're going to be doing a lot of work, and I'm going to help you guys boost it because you guys have a lot of great information to share. So I'm gonna pass it to you here, Peter. Can you explain this article, what the message you want to get out, anything in particular you want to highlight as we scroll through? I just want to get your thoughts, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, like the bottom line is that we're in really, really, really deep trouble. Like the best case scenario is we rapidly begin a systemic transformation, like a complete page one rewrite of the global economic system. And then we might be able to keep warming within 1.5 degrees. And then we're going to see increasingly worse, more stronger storms, more extreme droughts, floods, etc. That's all baked into the cake. There's no avoiding that at this point. But that's the best case scenario. The worst case scenario could be the elimination of all life on Earth if the complex system that we're dealing with, the climate system, ends up getting tipped past a tipping point where all of these positive feedback loops end up throwing our climate into the climate of Venus. Like Venus may very well have been a livable planet with water and a climate that life could have survived on, not so much anymore. So that's the worst case scenario. But a lot of people, when they're looking at this, it's easy to get very depressed. It's hopeless. There's nothing we can do. And when you look at the political economy of this, there's also good reason to be, fairly downbeat. But I think by analyzing the political economy for what it is, we can at least understand the structures better to destroy them or better to change them. So I just look at the three major polities in the world today, the US, EU, and China, And what is the political economy, the problem in their political economy that leads to this horrible situation that we're in today? And the U.S., the fundamental thing is, if you have financial power, if you have economic power, it's pretty easy to translate that into political power, right? Like, you donate to politicians, you buy lobbyists so that you can convince those politicians that what's good for you, for your investments, is good for the whole country. And then you can also propagandize the entire country. You can influence school curricula. You can influence universities. Look at economics departments. Like the field of economics is in such a sorry state in the US and around the world. Not all of them, but the mainstream is just worse than worthless. It's actively harmful. So you can propagandize people through that. You can also propagandize people through the media. So you can just distract them with, buy Zola shit, like the white left stuff, rather than focusing on political economy, imperialism, etc. So in the US, very easy to turn financial power into political power. In the EU, slightly more difficult. They have more regulations on campaign financing. But still, you can influence politics. You can translate financial power into economic power. There was some French researchers that were doing something that Tom Ferguson has done in the US, and they found that, yeah, you can still buy votes, and actually it's potentially cheaper to buy votes because campaign finance regulations limit the amount you can give, so that what you do give becomes even more influential. But leaving that aside, the other major problem in the EU is their economic ideology. They're even to the right of the US today, which is mind-blowing for me, and probably for you as well, who was politicized in the early 2000s. When we are looking around the world, we're like, oh my God, we've got this crazy militarist country we're living in. But at least in Europe, you've got people that realize that this is a bad idea. Well, on economic ideology, Europe is even worse than the US today. And it's institutionalized in the Eurozone. And basically what it does is it prevents governments from creating money and gives that power almost exclusively to private banks, because we know that private banks are so responsible and they only make the correct decisions on how to create money and allocate resources, right? So that's the problem in the EU. In China, the one bright side that you see in China is that they don't have those ideological barriers. They have it to some extent because they adopted our Western economic ideology to a large extent, which is very disconcerting, to put it mildly. But they still have that Marxist tradition. They still have that idea of the government can help transform society, and that equality is at least a goal that should be strived after, right? So in China, you have at least the possibility that the government can mobilize the population to start the systemic transformation of the economic system. In the US and the EU, that's the real impediment. When what we need is a complete transformation of the global economic system, you have to have the government capable of intervening strongly, of intervening to really reshape all of these economic structures. So in China, you don't have that impediment. So that's why I say it's the least hopeless. I'm not saying it's very hopeful for a lot of reasons. They still use a lot of coal. They view that as a national security issue for good reason. They've got coal reserves. They have plenty of coal-fired power plants. They know that technology. They can ramp it up, no problem. The U.S. Navy can't cut off coal supplies. But we're not in a very good position. But I think by understanding the political economy, if more people understood that, we could attack the weak points in the structure a little more effectively. And I don't give a damn whether it's the US, EU, or China who's leading the way. I wish all three of them would. But I just lay that out there, and I'm interested to hear what people think.
That's a fantastic breakdown. Do you have anything you want to add, Karim?
Yeah, well, that brings me actually to China again. I think that's an interesting topic right now, also for us international leftists, and that is that there is a necessity for us to go international. Like in the 20th century, you had that with Pan-Africanism, Pan-Asianism, and the way they combined their powers. I mean, you even had Japanese delegations coming to the United States dealing with black Americans, that was like they were all cooperating against this imperialist system. It has been completely decimated in the neoliberal era. But to get back to this whole internationalism and China thing, what is the problem right now for us leftists? Okay, we want to go international. We want our sound, our message to get heard. But what is happening? We are using the tools in the heart of empire, Google, Facebook, Instagram, to spread our message that wants to deconstruct empire, which is just not going to work. Like, seriously. And why am I saying this? Because if you look at the amount of views cat videos Ben Shapiro, Vosh get compared to real leftist messages like yours, like maybe, hopefully in the future, ours a little bit more.
The
but
deeply
also
unserious left, and just to add to it, and I'll pass it right back to you, the deeply unserious left, they're very privileged, and people who call me divisive, calling them out. I'm like, I'm not divisive. I just don't believe in the existence of a false peace. And when there are people like Vosh who sound like Rush Limbaugh, like when you talk about foreign policy, and then there's like this lack of caring at all. I mean, they still prop up the imperialist, warmongering Democratic Party. They attack and they call us tankies for standing up for imperialism on the Western left, and it's like, I'm like, what are y'all talking about? Like, I used to see her turn like, yeah, and after being in the community for a while, I realized it's the white privileged class. They call people that who debunk and they don't accept CIA and national security state point propaganda. So they rather focus on their channel, like, oh, let's talk about what Ben Shapiro said. Let's talk about what Dave Rubin said. Let's see what Fox News, did they do a segment? You see what they said? You see what Gene Pirro said? You see what Trump said? It's all these deeply unserious topics. And if you enjoy that, whatever. I'm not judging you. I guess I do sound judgmental, but I'm not trying to. Enjoy what you want to enjoy. But the problem is that unseriousness gets all the views. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I want to talk about real issues. That's why we have both of you guys on. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kareem, but do you want to finish your thought you had earlier?
No problem, Nick. So there is another thing going on that we must understand. That it's not just, people are not serious and they don't want to listen to things like, for example, Abby Martin or the Gray Zone, which is real important stuff.
I love Abby Martin.
Yeah, but they are not getting so little views just because they are not, people are not interested. I think people are interested, but the algorithms and moderation do not allow these channels to become bigger. Voice is okay. Gossip is okay. Cat videos are okay. In fact, Ben Shapiro with his right-wing nonsense is okay. So you see that within the West, the right-wing message gets boosted continuously. So you keep a society thinking in that Fox manner, that Fox channel manner. You know what I mean? Or at least in the MSNBC manner as well. So what I'm trying to say is that we try to create an international leftist message using the tools of empire to fight empire itself, which is just not going to work. It's like going into the Democratic Party and fighting the Democratic Party from within. Not going to work. You know, what we need is mobilizing people outside of our Western borders, where we don't have the machine continuously crushing your message. For example, in China, there's more than 1.5 billion people that are interested in understanding US empire, the way it works, where you have mass audience that can listen to you. But what are we doing? We're all sticking on YouTube, which is just an imperial tool. We're sticking on Facebook, which is an imperial tool, and we are hoping that by staying here and talking to each other, we are building a movement. Abby Martin has been here for years, and her stuff is really good. Look at the amount of subscribers she has.
Her documentary outlining the brutal occupation in Palestine and the work she has done over the last maybe 10 years, because she was one of the first people that was a solid. I remember her and Lee Camp. I give them a lot of credit because those are the first two real solid anti-war journalists I discovered. I'm like, whoa, that's different perspective. But go ahead, Kareem, finish your thought.
Yeah, and this is so important for us to understand that we need support outside of Europe, and that includes media systems, because our message will be more free in a place like, for example, China. Now, you will always have the Vosh left and right wingers who will say China is authoritarian. How can you work together with China? To them, I say, what's the problem with China is up to the Chinese, not me. That's one. Number two, there is not a country, including China, that has been wreaking so much havoc, destruction, and pain as the United States. So who am I going to work with? Am I going to work with the United States, or am I going to work with China? Then I prefer China, to be very honest. Because China has not made people of color suffer around the world continuously for 500 years. And they suffered colonialism.
We jail 25% of the world's prison population, not China.
Right.
Imagine if there was cops that were brutally killing black people in China the way it happened in America. But go ahead and tell me more about why I should focus on the Chinese regime. Tell me more about why I should focus on Russia when you had the United States police using poison gas on protesters.
Yeah.
But tell me more about other countries.
Right.
Did you see that letter?
That's the whole fake human rights debate. Because the West thinks that they have the human rights, but they ignore people of color who have been suffering for 500 years in the West. They don't count for human rights. Human rights for white people, I always say. The rest of the world doesn't count. If you're Syrian or an Iraqi, forget about your human rights. Are you from Cuba? Forget about your human rights. You're Chinese, forget about your human rights. You know what I mean? Go ahead, Peter. Sorry.
Your point, Kareem. Like, also by building bridges around the world, you increase like understanding between people of different countries, and then that makes it harder for the U.S. empire and its media lackeys to gin up support for any sort of military action. Like, when you actually are engaging with people from around the world, that helps to destroy the kind of otherizing other people. But bringing up the human rights thing, like, there was this letter that Marco Rubio and some other senator or congressman wrote 2 years ago. It was the thing that kind of kicked off the recent anti-China, oh my God, China human rights, so terrible. They wrote an open letter and they were like, China is imprisoning up to 500,000, maybe even 1 million ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. That would make it the single largest mass incarceration of an ethnic minority population in the world. And my brain just fell out of my head when I saw that. It's like, dude, you are in the United States. There are 1.1, 1.2 ethnic minorities in prison in the United States at any given time. How can you make such an embarrassing statement as that? You are so unself-aware, but that never gets pointed out. So, people are like, "Oh my God, you're traveling to China? Like, what about the human rights situation there? What about the mass incarceration of ethnic minorities?" I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't want to go to a country and spend my tourist dollars in a country that's a mass incarcerating ethnic minorities. That's why I don't go to the U.S.
Hey, exactly. I was literally just about to say, if you're African, bro, you better watch out for that NYPD. You better watch out for the LAPD. You better be careful when you travel to America, because their cops are completely out of control. And one thing that is a very important point that I want to make is the depravity in the American culture of accepting these war criminals. I was just talking to Misty about this. You had Anthony Blinken that was on Sesame Street. Anthony Blinken, who supports the genocide in Israel, who supported every single war. And he's the one who pushed Biden. Imagine being the guy who's an advisor to Biden and pushing him to the right. He was the one advising Biden and got his support, and he led the coalition to support the Iraq war, for example. Tony Blinken is about as bad as it gets as a war hawk neocon. But our culture is so depraved. We have people like him on Sesame Street. He made multiple appearances, being rehabilitated. You had George Bush Jr. on Ellen giving dance routines, and that stuff worked. Like, it disgusts me because his approval rating actually jumped significantly ever since the neoliberal class rehabilitated him. And now they did that for a very clear reason, as it seems, because they want to rehabilitate George Bush Jr. and they want to normalize these kind of behaviors because that's the same foreign policy they are continuing. So they don't want that to be demonized, and then people are like, "Wait, you doing the same thing, George Bush Jr.?" No, not that big. George Bush, he was a good guy. It was so even when they talk about Trump, I went after Trump a lot, but I hated Democrats because they kept bringing up nonsense. Oh, look at Stormy Daniels. Oh, Russiagate, all this nonsense. I'm like, bro, Trump is funding genocides in Yemen right now. He's trying to overthrow the country of Venezuela illegally. They literally got caught. They sent mercenaries that was caught by the Venezuela government. And you're focusing on nonsense like Stormy Daniels? They do that because they don't want you to criticize Trump on the stuff they are complicit with. What's your guys' thoughts?
There's an estimated 40,000 people that were killed in Venezuela as a direct result of U.S. sanctions. But we're talking about like Trump's dick and what Stormy Daniels says about it. Like it's just, Anyway.
Yeah, and this is what happens to the rehabilitation of George Bush and all these war criminals is the same thing as having statues of colonial oppressors around Europe and ex-slave owners. All these statues where they are celebrated, it's the same idea. You celebrate icons, political icons, who just killed and oppressed other people, and then you rehabilitate them to keep people indoctrinated and mentally colonized with the idea that you are great. And that even George Bush was great, even though he destroyed the world. He destroyed life in so many ways, not just so many deaths in the Middle East, but he literally transformed societies in even more reactionary, more separated, more hating each other, both across countries and within countries. It's just fascinating how easily people are indoctrinated, and that brings me back to the point I just made, Nick. Is that we really, really need to start looking to expand our media networks to non-Western audience outside of Western ruled, moderated systems of broadcasting, such as YouTube. And because forget it, look at Jimmy Dore, and Jimmy Dore is not even as radical as you, me, and the rest of people on this channel, because Jimmy Dore in a way still maintains that is a bit balancing between not going too far on issues of racism, that kind of stuff, because he has a lot of right wingers in his audience. But even Jimmy Dore is stuck under around 900,000 subscribers. If they would let him go, he would have millions. I promise you. And you believe me, Nick, Fred Hampton leftists, they won't even let you get close.
Yeah, people have no idea how much they throw our channel. I mean, I got 60,000 subscribers on Twitter, and our channel grew because of word of mouth. We had amazing amount of activists that come on our show. If it wasn't for that, like I'm thinking about and that's why I wanted to bring you guys on, and I think we need to build this coalition to help expand independent media, because it's so important for many different reasons. The corporate media is one of the most biggest problems that we have right now, and we need a counter to that. There is literally no counter to that, and it's international connected. And when you look at the media in the UK, the BBC and all that stuff, so they are deeply pro-Israel, and they slander anyone who even hints that Palestinians should have rights. And so when I talk about the American propaganda, I talk about that because that's where I'm most specialized in. But I definitely see the connection of the United States propaganda and the international propaganda with their allies, and how they maintain this white supremacist imperialist system. So they suppress the crap out of our channel. We got to do everything we can to help each other grow, so we can fight against the mainstream propaganda, because this is the kind of propaganda, because I think this relates to our story, this is the kind of propaganda that's so subtle that people don't see it, like to the point where you even have channels that people think are liberal. They will say stuff like, well, we need the working class people to stop using straws, we need you guys to make a lot of personal sacrifices, and and people think this is the liberal position. Like, and there are a lot of people I saw mention in the comments in the chats here, so shout out to anyone who mentioned this. But it's the climate crisis is the crisis the 1% caused. Even if everyone was perfect citizens, if everyone stopped drinking plastic straws, the top 1% would still be responsible for 70% of the emissions. And that's what even what the so-called liberal media don't talk about. Do you see? That's how deep the indoctrination in our country is. I want to get Peter's thought. I want to get him jump in here. What's your thoughts, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, like, I find it's a good thing that we see a kind of growth on the internet in actual left media. But I think we need to keep realistic, because, you know, we can look at channels here and there that have 10,000, 100,000, whatever subscribers, but keep in mind what we're up against. Because if you look at cable, Tucker Carlson gets 3 million a night. Rachel Maddow gets like 1.5, 2 million a night. And that's just one show. All on those networks, you've got other shows getting 1 million here, 500,000 there, and that's just cable. Then look at broadcast. Now we're talking about millions of people tuning into the nightly news. So that's what we're up against, and that's the dark side. That's the depressing part. But the upside, and this is something that almost nobody knows, but it should be, you know, like front and center for every single leftist. There's been public opinion research in the United States going back to the late 1950s that shows that only 1 out of 5 people in the country, 1 out of 5 people, can even define what liberalism and conservatism is. So what that means is the overwhelming majority are politically apathetic, or they know very little about politics. And, you know, you can look at that and you know, cry about it. Or you can look at it and say, actually, that's kind of a good thing for us, because that means we don't have to argue against people who have been thoroughly propagandized and have like a lot of information in their heads that's organized according to, you know, liberal or conservative ideology, like the standard US version. That means that we have 80% of the country that if we can actually reach them, and that's the difficult part. And I think part of it is media, the kind of thing that you know, we're doing here. But also, it's like following what the Black Panthers were doing, setting up real world community organizations that get face-to-face contact with people. So you can educate people face-to-face while you're helping them, while you're providing some sort of service that they need in the community. That's how we can get information into many more people's heads. So keep in mind, when you hear people on TV saying, oh, like Nina Turner, like she was too left, and, you know, most people are in the middle, that's horseshit.
Have you seen the latest out of the Hill? And I'll let you continue, but the latest out of the Hill that, and I keep telling people, the United States is the most propagandized state. There was a Hill article that came out that said that Joe Biden numbers are dropping. I can explain that for a lot of different ways. And they said it's because he went too far left.
That's what they always do. That's what they always do.
You actually retweeted me. He actually posted my response to that, when I've debunked it, obviously. Well, like, you had Joe Biden that's bombing Africa. He's funding apartheid states. He's not addressing the climate crisis. He's still fracking. They're promoting oil drilling permits. He is expanding ICE in the police state. So the fact that I even had to spend 1 second debunking this is nonsense. I think that lays into your point. But I'll let you finish, Peter.
Yeah, so that you can blame political science for that, because all of these journalists, you know, they go to fancy universities and they'll take their poli-sci 101 class and they'll learn the median voter theory, or the spatial theory of voting. And the idea is you have like a normal bell curve, and you have the left over here and the right over here, and there's only a few people on the far right and a few people on the far left, and everyone is basically in the middle there. That's, you know, a nice little graphing exercise, but it has nothing to do whatsoever with reality. So all of these people, all these pundits who make points like this, like, oh, Biden's moving left, which, first of all, as you just pointed out, is not true. But the implication is because he's moving away from that big center where most people are, that's why his opinion ratings are going down. But of course, that cannot possibly be the explanation, because we know that 80% of people in this country don't know enough about politics to even define the most basic categories in our political discourse.
And that's such an important point, because, you know, they use that as propaganda, where they will say the America is a conservative state, because when asked in polls, Americans say they are conservatives. And then the media repeat this uncritically, where they're like, well, this is proof that you can't run on popular left ideas because Americans say they're conservative. And your point, this is why I bring this up, because I'm like, if you ask Americans, most of them support Medicare for all, 70% in the country. Is that conservative? Are you saying that?
Well, that's probably what most Americans would think. They would think like, yeah, it's conservative to want people to have health care. Like, I want to conserve human life. Yeah. But I'm not joking. Like this is the reality, and this information is just not very widespread, and it drives me kind of crazy when we have all of these people making arguments exactly like that stupid Hill opinion piece, and the assumption again is from that median voter theory. It's like everyone is in the middle. That's just not true. The vast majority are just ignorant. And that's not an insult. In fact, if anything, that's a compliment. Because if you look at the US media system and you choose to tune out, that shows that you're very intelligent, you know? Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, you know, that's the kind of thinking we get. And it screws up our political analysis. Because then we think, oh, we need to, you know, stay away from being too far left. No, you have to stay away from being too far left on social issues in red parts of the country. But in those same uber red parts of the country, left-wing economic ideas are popular. That's what you get when you actually look at public opinion research, but people don't do that. And so instead we get this narrative of everyone's in the center, when in fact the center, the ideology that is dominant in DC and New York in elite circles of being economically conservative and socially liberal, that is the smallest ideological group in the United States. And this is we have evidence for this. This is not just me like, oh, this would be nice if that were true. No, that is the polling data.
Yeah, the only people who believe the nonsense that come out of the corporate media about voters are actually economically conservative, the whole thing where they're like, oh, socially liberal, fiscally conservative. And I'm like, once again, as you mentioned now, they fall for those labels. And the people who believe that, they showed how they are out of touch. And a lot of them show that they don't touch grass. I learned this was nonsense when I started organizing. You guys realize that, right? And they want to know my background, where I went to South Carolina. I was canvassing with Bernie. Before I got into politics, I used to sell cars in Kansas, surrounded by conservatives. So I was being fed one thing by the media, like, oh, you can't talk about left policies. And I didn't know how to debunk it back then. But I would talk to people, and I'm like, this guy redneck as hell. And he's like, hell yeah, we should have health care. Like something like that. So it was like, and just conversation after conversation. I went to South Carolina, talked to even a lot of conservative black people. I talked to Breonna Joy Gray about that. But I was talking to conservative black people, conservative white people, and they're like, yeah, we should end the wars. We should get health care. We should increase the minimum wage. I'm like, how? And then that's a whole nother conversation, how they get tricked to voting for the two-party duopolies that don't promote those things. That's why the United States is the most propagandized country, because they will convince people that don't even believe in the ideology of neoliberal capitalism that both parties really promotes, but they still support them. That's how crazy our propaganda system is. But that's your point. Is when I know this because my real life experience, and I talk to other people who had on FHL. They said the same thing. I talk to other people who say the same thing. And that's the only way we're able to dispute, because the media have been fed us the exact opposite for how long now?
Yeah. And that brings me to an interesting discussion, Nick, that I was wondering about. So I find it's a very, very difficult thing. Like I just heard Peter say that, hey, okay, if you just shut up about social issues, talk about economic issues, you can get them on your side, right? These right wingers. Yeah. In the red state, yeah. And I always find this a very difficult debate. Like, should we get right wingers on our side, you know, as leftists? And of course, you should get right wingers on your side. But in my opinion, it is as long as it doesn't. As long as you do not need to suppress your fight against racism. So why am I saying this? I noticed that the more Jimmy Dore, for example, got a conservative audience, the less he started to talk about racism, because that is something the right-wing audience just doesn't want to hear. Anti-imperialism is still fine. Okay, wars is still fine. It's still fine to talk about
this. But, sorry, I talked to Savvy about this, and she noticed whenever you mention black or white, or whenever you have race issues in your title, especially as a black content creator, numbers plummet significantly because people don't want to hear that. Even the white left. But sorry, Karim, go ahead. I just want to bring that up because that backs your point. So go ahead, Karim.
Good point, Nick. And what you see here are again two things. It's people are not interested, plus the algorithms. If you use black, white supremacy, imperialism, the algorithms will suppress you immediately. So, but I noticed that in Jimmy Dore, I noticed that was a change, because in the very old days, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, he would talk about police violence regularly. he would talk about these racist things of racism regularly. But that has almost completely disappeared. He will sometimes say like, yeah, Joe Biden is a racist and a sexist and a blah, blah, blah. But he will never go into the deeper issues. You know, that's also a bit of a problem with the white left. But let's say that is something that I find very difficult when you say, okay, we need to work with the right. Yeah, fine. But there are a lot of leftists, for example, and I even saw them sometimes in the chat of Fred Hampton leftists. You know, probably they are not black people or any people of color. And that is that I have no tolerance for white leftists who don't want us to talk about race, okay, and racism or white supremacy, because they always say that it's all about class. Stop talking about racism or white supremacy. That's only used to divide us, to distract us from the real problem. It's class. Yeah. You understand what I'm getting at? Like I have a very strong problem with this, because these so-called leftists avoid talking about an issue that makes them feel uncomfortable, okay, and at the same time threatens their privilege. Because to leftists like this, I would say, if you have a white and a black man from a lower social class, you put on nice clothes on both of them, the black man and the white man from a lower social class, and you let them walk onto the streets. The poor white guy is to everyone else on the streets a white man. The poor black guy can wear a nice suit, a golden ring. He is always a black guy, okay? So this means that reality is leaps and bounds different when it comes to a black man compared to a white man. So with regards to how people look at you, how you're treated, police violence, your safety, the respect you get from people around you, applying for a bank account, getting a job. So what I'm trying to say is that as long as race as an invented category plays a huge role in our lives, we must, and I repeat, must emphasize racism and white supremacy until it's gone. When it's gone, then we can reduce our struggle simply only to class. You understand what I mean? But I cannot and will not accept leftists and right-wingers who say we shouldn't talk about race because it's divisive. It's about class. No, it's not about class. It's about race and class and the way the two interact.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree. I just don't think that in the US, like that's, well, I mean, I've never encountered that, like people actually making that argument. I think some of the allergy that people on the left have is that you have race being used cynically by neoliberals as like a way to basically support their essentially right-wing economic policies, and just saying, hey, I'm going to say, really nice words like Hillary Clinton saying, if we break up the big banks, how is that going to solve racism? Well, it's not. Like, who's making that argument? Nobody is. It's just a nonsense point. But when I said that thing about like, shut the fuck up about social issues in red states, that's just a purely electoral thing. That's just like, what you say on the campaign trail. But then when it comes to actual policy, you just vote along with the people in the blue states on whatever policy there is. And I don't know any leftists that focus on class primarily who aren't also supportive of any policy meant to or intended to eliminate racial disparity.
Can you add one thing? Because and I got a lot to say there. I'll pass it to Peter here very soon. There's a lot to unpack there. And since we dropping names, and I think this is a very good example, because I didn't even want to call it out. I was just checking this debate out as a nerd, but Vosh debated Charlie Kirk. So we had two white guys that were debating critical race theory. So you see how this is gonna go, right? And one thing, I had no intention of talking about this. I was just watching this because I was curious. I'm a political nerd. I wanted to see how this was gonna go down, honestly. So then I was watching the debate, and then Charlie Kirk was pressing them on reparations. The idea of two privileged white people talking about reparations, fucking hilarious. Then Bosch crumbled, and he said, yeah, I agree. I don't think reparations should be paid based on race. I think it should be paid based on class.
There you go. Yeah.
What? That was the dumbest shit. And then I tweeted about that and blew up. And once again, I wasn't even trying to create beef. But I was just watching that because I was, once again, I know people like, why you watch that? I'm a nerd, guys. Like, I love to see different exchanges of ideas, even people I don't agree with. I was like, I just want to see Vosh and Charlie Kirk engage with each other. And then I saw that and I'm like, bro, that was the dumb. That's exactly what you're talking about, Kareem. He said what to repeat, and you guys, I promise to God, and no one even denied it. The Vosh fans even couldn't deny it. He said reparations should be based on class, not on race.
There you go.
What?
That's exactly what I mean.
What? That's insane. So that's exactly what you mean, Kareem. And now I want to talk about to position. We do need to talk about race, and we need to challenge right wingers on race. That's super important because that was what Fred Hampton did. There's a misconception that Fred Hampton was just working with white people and white racists. He only worked with people once they denounced their previous racism, which was rampant back in the day, especially in the early 60s, and a lot of violence. And we had Jimmy Dore on our show, and we talked to him about that. And he's like, yeah, I get what you guys are saying. And that's kind of what I meant. I meant like anti-racist. So I hope he continued to say that. I talked to him about that, and that showed that Jimmy Dore is intellectually at least honest. He admitted like maybe he's like, yeah, you're all right about the fact that Fred Hampton didn't work with racists, even though Dore said it's on. So that I give props for Dore for saying.
Oh, but I've never said that Jimmy Dore is a racist.
Yeah,
I always watch him, but what I notice is a change in how much emphasis he puts on racism. Yeah, right.
Yeah. I'm gonna get to that point, and I'll let you add a little bit more because I don't want to represent your position. But I remember there was a giant controversy when Jimmy Dore had the Boogaloo Boy on, and we talked about it. That's our most viewed video. Go to our videos, select most view. Obviously, it's our video where we had a conversation about Jimmy Dore and a conversation with the Boogaloo Boy, and there was bad faith attacks on me because people were trying to misrepresent my position. Well, I was like, I don't care if he had talked to a Boogaloo Boy. And the people were like, what, you promoting the Red Brown Alliance? I'm like, wait. Let me explain this. For one, the Red Brown Alliance, as you guys use it, is just a slur against activists to try and just attack anyone who want to organize with the working class. It may be historical examples of this, but based on my experience, based on who I know in activism, I don't know anyone who's like, yo, I want to work with racists. I want to work with fascists. Like, that doesn't exist. So I think it's a smear. Now, what I saw with the Boogaloo Boy thing, and there are people like, oh, you shouldn't platform a racist, you shouldn't talk to a racist. Now, and that's a whole nother discussion. Now, what I want to bring up is there has been a very popular saying on Black Twitter. This is something that has gone viral multiple times, and this is kind of the feelings of the young Black left, which I agree with. The point is, it is not the job of Black people to talk to racists. It's the job of white people to talk to white people to convince them not to be racist, right? And I've seen people make different variations of that tweet. All of them always go viral, and Black people largely agree with that. And what's the argument against that? It's not my job to convince. It's your job. So now let me add on to this, because I was reacting to a lot of people who misrepresent my position. There are a lot of white people in the United States who are around racist family members and racist friends, and they say. Right. They virtue signal and they say, "Oh, I'm gonna cut this person off. I'm not gonna talk to no racist. And this is I'm gonna put my line in the sand. No racism. I'm not gonna talk to him." You know what my position is? You are not helping. You are not helping us when you say you don't want to convert anti-racist. So now allow me to be intellectually consistent here. Now, if that's my position, that's why I didn't get more mad when Dore talked about to the Boogaloo Boy, because I don't want to talk to these people. I don't want to talk to Klans people. I don't want to talk to Nazis. I don't want to talk to none. I'm not saying the person that he talked to, because there's a debate on where his stance is. I don't want to misrepresent Magnus, because his claim is he's not racist. I don't want to just smear him as racist. I'll let people decide that, because their claim is he goes after racism. He may have bad takes in the past, but he's trying to get better. Now, isn't that what we're trying to do? I thought the whole point is we're trying to get these people to go better, and that's why I have my position. And if you're curious, check out my whole interview with Jimmy Dore. It's about 20 minutes.
Oh, I've seen it. Yeah,
I know you've seen it, and I think a lot of people. And I'm gonna pass it back to Karim so he can continue his take, because I talked about it with him before. I love his perspective on that. But there was a lot of misconception and nonsense around this issue, and I took this position. And once I clarified it, people understood, because I laid out in the video. And to Dore's credit, he was like, yeah, I get your thesis, because JB put back on him when they asked him about whether, oh no, we don't want to work with racists. And then Jimmy was like, yeah, Fred Hampton didn't do that. So he corrected himself on that. And I think he had the right mindset, and he might have been sloppy if you want to criticize him for that. But I think our goal is for the white people to talk to the anti and make white people anti-racist. Now, I think there is criticisms that you can lay on how much these white leftists, especially people with giant platforms, how much they should talk about race. And now I think that's a legitimate discussion to have, and that what Karim was bringing up as well. So that's kind of my take overall on that. People was like, "Oh, you want to work with racists? You want to work?" How do you get that take from what I said?
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll pass back to Karim, but that's my take on the situation in general.
I've noticed that this is a very, very sensitive topic. It doesn't matter what way you say it, Nick. Also, my words, people will always misconstrue it and they become angry. You will have white people who become angry. You will have black. Oh, and why don't you say this? And why don't you think that? It's a very difficult topic to always talk about, because people will feel that the moment you start talking about it, it's racist already. But that's the thing. We can all conclude here, our multicolored panel also, that we are not racists. Okay, but the thing is, I just notice. I hear an echo. Who's that?
I'm muted, so you can. Everyone can mute.
Peter, maybe you're maybe a bit lower. So it's a very contentious topic, and why is it so contentious? Because we are putting in Dutch we say the finger on the sensitive spot. Okay, when we talk about this is a sensitive spot that hasn't been talked about for many, many decades. We talked about racism, but going through the root of it is something that is happening now. And so for the first time, for example, people classified as white are becoming increasingly aware of their whiteness. That was something that didn't happen before. You were unracialized as a white person. That is making things very sensitive. So white people often will say to me, "Oh, so you think all white people, you're a racist. You know, because it's so sensitive that we're now speaking about white people in a way that often also has been spoken about brown people and black people. And we can go on and on with different kind of categories, but we're talking about race now. There are many other categories, gender, sex, but we're talking about race here. And what you see is that in my opinion, that the sense of urgency is not there among many white leftists, because they don't get the everyday reality of going out the door being not white. Okay, this is a daily struggle. Whether you enter a shop, whether you have a new girlfriend and you're introduced to their parents, whether you want a loan at the bank, whether you want a job, whether somebody crosses the road when she sees you approaching because you're a black man or not. All these daily little interactions to the big ones are so straining on people's lives, also for men and women, that there is a sense of urgency among people of color to talk about this and to solve this terrible system. And you see that lacking among white leftists. I know Jimmy Dore is not a racist. I am fully convinced of it. In fact, I know he's a genuine leftist. That's why I watch his show all the time. But why do I prefer Fred Hampton leftists? Because Fred Hampton leftists talks about the shit that I also find urgent. And Jimmy Dore lacks that part. Not all the parts. He talks about imperialism, but he ignores the right. Of course, the right gets enough attention, but he completely ignores it. And he also always does a compare to Trump game. I'm getting a bit tired of that. Biden is worse than Trump on this. Biden is worse than Trump on that. Okay, we know it. You hate the liberals. We all hate the liberals. Okay, stop the whole comparing to Trump and then liberals are more evil than a conservative. They're all evil. So stop that game. And secondly, racism. Of course, he will say he's against racism and they will mention it for here and there. But the deeper discussions that you have on Fred Hampton leftists, for example, is something that is sorely lacking in all these white leftist channels. And I say white. Yes, I say white. Because in general, which you know who also goes into it? Richard Medhurst. He is also someone who does it very well. He talks about how he suffers as a brown Arabic person in Europe and whose country is being bombed and how that is influencing his life. Okay. And you cannot blame many white people because their lived experience is very different. You know what I mean? So to get back to what you just said, is that well, I'll leave it at this. Maybe Peter has something to say.
We're about 90 minutes in, but I don't like rushing conversation. But I want to give everyone last thoughts. It can be related to the topic or anything that you want to bring up. So I'll pass it to Peter, and you can add on to what Karim was talking about, what we were talking about. I'm gonna add a little bit to that as well, and I'll pass it to Karim, and then we can wrap up from there. So go ahead, Peter.
Well, while Karim was talking, somebody posted a comment that I thought was relevant. They said, like, what about left organizations that tolerate racism within their midst? And then I just define left differently. Like, if you're tolerating racism within your organization, that's not even bizoa anymore. That's not even, white left, bizoa. That's worse than that, because you don't even have like the virtue of the bizoa, which is at least recognizing that racism is a problem, but then you leave out the most potent form of racism, which is mass murdering people in other parts of the world through bombing, through invasion, or through economic policy, which can just as effectively kill people. So yeah, like if there's no tolerating racism within a leftist organization, then it's no longer left. But that's
Right.
not the same as, I think, what Nick is talking about, you have to convert people. You can't just like cut people off and then brag about it. Like, look how morally pure I am because I have this like racist uncle and I don't talk to him anymore. Like, that's what does that accomplish? That accomplishes nothing. Like, you have an opportunity because you have somebody in your family who has racist ideas. Well, use that opportunity to get those racist ideas out of their heads. Like, and I agree. Like, it's on the people who have connections with racist people, primarily white people, to convince the people that they know that are racist to get rid of those dumb ideas. And like what Karim always brings up, again, when we talk about race, we should always say like white and black and Latino. Yeah. Like, these are all these made up categories that were created to justify the slave trade. So we really should keep that front and center, that these are all just these fantasies that have been created. And so we have to get rid of these memes in people's heads. So that's on all of us, but primarily people, like, it's mostly white people who have connections, family members, etc., who have racist ideas. Well, that's on you, definitely. If you're non-white and you want to convince white racists, like, awesome, you're a saint. But I think it's mostly on the shoulders of white people.
Now, this is a very interesting conversation. I'm at this point, and I'll give you the last word, Karim. I got a lot I want to unpack there, especially as a Black leftist. I would love to share my experience. Now, I have been a shock to the liberal consciousness, especially these liberals who believe they are anti-racist, and I have debunked, and I am being proven right by the course of the government right now. I was telling people, like, bro, just because you supporting Joe Biden does not mean you're anti-racist. There are people that think they're converting people for being racist just because they turn to Democrats. These are more like the false crowd. You're not turning people anti-racist. You just turn to Biden voters. Now, what matters to me is not your rhetoric, because everyone, even you have people like Ben Shapiro, you have people who, I don't know all these people's names like that. I wish I can give you more examples. Like, there are all these, the far right wing.
Tim, what was his name? Tim something. Tim
Posiak or
Tim
something?
Tim Cook or something. What was it?
The Rush Limbaughs, the Glenn Becks, the hardcore right wingers. Even that's my point. Even they would say they're not racist, right? So why would I give white people the benefit of the doubt? And I know that may become shocking to people.
Tim Pool, Tim Pool. I see it in the chat.
Tim Pool, Like, you guys can keep naming them if you want. It's fun. Like I said, I don't follow these people like that, so I'm sure you guys got a lot of examples. Gotta tell you, I don't focus that much on right wing. I just seen some stuff from them, and they are like, even how hardcore racist they are, and they are. These are the same people that say George Floyd is a thug who deserved to die, but then they'll say that, and then they'll be like, no, I'm not racist. And I'm like, I don't believe you when you say that. And then liberals will say, we don't believe you either. So my response to liberals when they say they're not racist is, I'm like, I don't believe you. The reason why I don't believe you is because the Democratic Party today, unanimously, every senator voted for increasing the police budget, expanding the police state. Now, I also read in the op-ed about how Medicare for all is one of the most pro-black policies you can advocate for. So if you're not for healthcare for all people who will most be impacted by that, you're not you're not pro-black to me. You have to prove it through the course of your actions. And when I talk to you guys have leftist ideas, and this is why I'm not too hard at the people who at least talk about the right ideas when it comes to police violence. And there's a lot of white leftists who want to they focus on what will help the white suburbanites. And now this is the main topic of discussion. Now, I mentioned that Medicare for all is the most pro-black policy, but Medicare for all and canceling student loan debt and those kind of things would benefit the white suburbanite class as well. So you see these white leftists, they talk about that all the time. And I'm get it, bro. I wrote an op-ed for Medicare for all. I get it. I get why we should cancel stuff. But you see, they only talk about that. And at the same time, they'll be like, I don't think we should support reparations because that's kind of divisive. No, we're supposed to make the argument. Why are you see how easily they drop our issues? And this goes back to defund the police. I'm gonna get my spiel about this because I covered intensively about how defund the police jumped up and skyrocketed in popularity. It was deeply underwater. Last summer, it was negative 33. And I even admitted that. Right now, it's supported by 55% independents. You know why? Because we made the argument. I was the one who covered defund the police more than any other content creator on the left by far. I don't got a big platform, but I promise you, go through my archives on this channel, on my YouTube channel, look at every single episode. I cover at least one pro-cop story, mostly on my live streams. So I can say without a single shed of a doubt, no one covered this issue more than me. And the argument I was making, I acknowledged at the time that defund the police is not popular. But the bus sit-ins wasn't popular. The civil rights movement wasn't popular. Women's suffrage wasn't popular at one point. Gay rights wasn't popular in my lifetime. So your argument that you're making as a white leftist is we shouldn't advocate for reparations. We shouldn't advocate for ending the police state. Oh, because it's too hard. Oh, we got an argument. I never backed from that challenge because last summer I said, bro, we are in the right on this issue because you can't justify giant police budgets that don't solve crime. And I'm like, bro, it's not a complicated position. So we made an argument. We continue to make the argument. That's why they came with that Senate bill. And I'm going to do a comprehensive report on this here soon, maybe in another stream, maybe tomorrow on our live panel on Thursday, where you guys, they're trying to say this is a defeat for defund the police, this bill that the Senate passed. But this bill that the Senate passed is a fascist government overreach where they want to punish local municipalities for defunding the police. Now think, why would they even pass that bill? Because people are having debates in their local governments. In Oakland, for example, there are a lot of different local governments that actually already defunded the police. And the people that lost the vote, there was a lot of votes. I covered this on my show that lost. But that debate is going to happen again next year. And now they're terrified because despite their propaganda, they see what's really happening. So that's why they passed this bill. So they frame it as a defeat, but it's not. This shows that we actually are stronger than ever. Now, my point is, why did I bring all this up? We got to where we are right now with no help from the white left. I repeat, no. What did Crystal Ball say on her show? Once again, I like Crystal. I can criticize people and still like them. You know what she said on her show last summer? I think defund the police is not a good slogan. I think it will hurt Democrats.
Yeah, that's that urgency again, Nick. That's that sense of urgency again.
That's exactly what you mean, Karim. You got anything you want to add real quick? I know I went pretty long, but that's my point. They abandoned us in that fight in a heartbeat because they didn't want to lose views. They knew they covered defund the police because they got popular channels. I didn't. I had nothing to lose. I had like 2,000 subscribers on my channel at the time. I had literally nothing to lose. I was like, bro, I'm gonna talk about this issue because I mean a lot for that. But a lot of people, like, once again, I like some of these people. You have people like Kyle Kalinske. You have people like Crystal Ball. You had a lot of people who were popular who didn't cover this issue because it was too controversial. Now, what that mean? Now these people are talking about it. They're like, oh yeah, defund the police. Now it's popular. They talking about it. I'm like, bro, you was not here when it was unpopular talking about this issue. Doesn't that lay out what you talking about, Karim, and their priorities? That's my criticism of white people. So if you're supportive, and I end on this, and I'll give you the last word, Karim, before we wrap up. If you're supportive of giant police budgets, if you are not fighting to end the fascist police system as we know it, how can you say you're anti-racist? That go for the liberals and that go for the conservatives. So that's why I said, as white people, you gotta prove without benefit of the doubt that you're not a racist. Now, if I see you fighting for Medicare for all, if I see you fighting for ending the wars, I'm like, okay, I get this guy benefit of the doubt. That's what Now, Kareem, I'll give you last word, then we wrap up. This was a great conversation, though. I got their YouTube channel, which is grossly underrated, in the description. So if you guys enjoyed this conversation, make sure you guys check them out. Kareem, you got anything you want to add to dialogue or anything you want to shout out?
So I
stuff too, but Kareem, I'll give you last word, and then we can do shout outs at the end.
Yeah. Okay. So I had a couple of things in my mind, but this is so frustrating. I lost them. In
yeah, I know that can happen in these long conversations, especially when I go on my rants.
Oh man, you said so many good things, and I was like, okay, I have to think about this. I have to think. But in the end, like I lost most of the things. But that's maybe something for next time. But
yeah, we're gonna do this again, so we got plenty to talk about. I remember we discussed what we were gonna talk about. There's still a lot of things we can bring up, but that's why we're gonna continue to grow this media space. But anything else you want to add, and I'll give Peter the floor for shout outs as well, and then we wrap up.
Yeah. So I think one interesting thing you said was about how family members, and when you hear that racist uncle, or I've noticed, and there you go. I come from a completely white family, and I grew up with white friends, so I know how when there is a safe space among in-group members, how easily racist language will come to the foreground. And one thing that I've always found very frustrating is like the silent majority. So you hear that racist uncle, that racist auntie, and the rest, everyone hears it, but nobody says a thing. You know, I find it very, very frustrating, especially if you're a leftist. You know, you hear somebody being racist in your vicinity, and you're just like, okay, I'm going to ignore it. I feel that is part of the problem. What I find very important is when you hear racist rhetoric, is that you push back, you know, and not like a liberal say, oh, I'm going to cut him off, never going to talk about it, talk to him. No, you're literally going to push back and say why these words are ridiculous or harmful or whatever, because it exists, because then people never get pushed back. You know, it becomes normalized, and that is the problem you see with many whites, also in my country. You know, like it's so normalized racism among safe space, among only whites, that when they had the racist jokes, Peter, you know, like it even happens with whites among each other in Hong Kong. But the moment that there's this safe space, and most people will just either laugh or say nothing. And I think this is very important to push back. Say, hey, wait a minute, man. Do you think this is normal, what you're saying? Like, where does this come from? Please tell me, why do you think like this? And because when they get pushback, this is like almost like an existential crisis. Like, what the hell is happening? Somebody of my own kind thinks that this is not normal. It's like again, it's planting a seed. Oh, and that's the other thing I wanted to talk about is that. Oh no, now I lost it again. Okay, I lost my train of thought. But
I address this question real quick, and I guess Peter can add on this too. Hold on, sorry, the comments moving fast. I lost it. I think this is interesting, and Peter can kind of wrap up if you want to answer this as well. If you want to, I can add quickly. He said, "I'm just saying, if you let the colonizers pay you off with reparations, aren't you just giving that power to him again?" Now it's very funny. I'm gonna answer this question real quick because I remember there were some black nationalists that was going after us for our take on reparations, which was hilarious, by the way.
Yeah,
because they was to our right. You know what their criticism of us was? They said, "Oh, how dare you talk about Medicare for all and canceling student loan debt instead of advocating for reparations?" I'm like, how do you get that out of my position? I said we should fight for Medicare for all because that's one of the most pro-black policies. We should fight for canceling student loan debt. That's one of the most pro-black policies because we had the most student loan debt, and we should fight for reparations. You guys understand that you're to my right, the black nationalists. I'm not gonna say their name because they want clout. That go after me because they made a fucking stupid ass video like Fred Hampton Leftists, what they get wrong on reparations, and their argument was you talking about other issues. You know what?
Yeah, or other groups or other groups.
You know what we said that pissed them off? We said, and I said this in my article as well. I said if you pass reparations without Medicare for all, you are giving that money to Big Pharma. You're giving that money to the vast majority of black people who have medical debt. You're giving that to landlords who will increase rent. So you gotta be strategic about reparations. Yeah. You can include canceling medical debt in part of reparations. You include cash checks. But my answer to these people who are to my right, who criticize me today, I think this relates to the question as well. Why are your ass so limited? They were like, it gotta be reparations or Medicare for all. Bro, our white supremacist system owes us everything. Everything. Yeah. And you guys are like, well, we only can ask for one because our country probably can't afford the rest of it. And they think they're making a good point. I'm not gonna drop their name because they just want clout. But they like, yo, we dropped this track on. I watched the video. This is the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life. But that answers your question, because your question is what you're saying. I don't know if it's a question, but what you're saying is a symptom of what they are advocating for. You saying if you let the colonizers just pay you off, you just giving them power again, because that money to go back to your medical bills, that money to go for directly to civil asset forfeiture, which steals our wealth.
I found my thought.
I'll let you add on to this too. I'm not rushing you guys, but I want to address this question because I had a lot. I'm not gonna they were like debate me. No, you're fucking stupid, because they fall for this trap. But Karim, what do you want to add?
Yeah, no, I just found the thought that popped up again while I was thinking, because Peter said something very, very important, and that is, it has to do with power, and this has to do with psychology, and that is actually that we need to start thinking about the categories that we have been put into by the former colonial oppressor. That is, first of all, color-coded categories: white, black, brown, which has not only separated us, but actually made us identify with an identity created for us by the oppressor. The most genetically diverse continent in the world, right, Peter, is Africa. But for the rest of the world, you're black. This is ridiculous. But the interesting thing is, it's so powerful that people in the African continent and around the world identify themselves as black and create a whole culture around it. Why? Because the oppressor has decided, because you all have melanin in your skin, you are black. That makes you all the same. And brown people. And yellow people. And this is color-coded racism. So that means our identity is based on the hue of our skin. And we all live to that idea. We all, that artificial idea of whiteness here, and then all the other color codes that you have around the world. And that and this is what is power. Power is not just, I hear echo again, but power is not just the ability to define yourself, like the white European has been able to do. Power is also the ability to define for other people who they are. And this is what has happened to us. So you now see a very interesting discussion in the gender world, non-binary and stuff. People who don't want to put themselves in a box again anymore, which is really good. Why do you have to be either a man or a woman, in which there is a whole cultural system built and you can either be one or the two, which is completely a social construction? Why are we not having that debate on race yet? Why am I put into a kind of color-coded bracket while I have so much in me I cannot even identify with any of them? I'm just me. You know what I mean? We need to start thinking about this psychological identity that has been created for us. You know what I mean? We are defining ourselves based on former colonial oppressors. I think that's a very important discussion we need to have, but that's something for in the future. I would like to end with I think the Meteor Dreams also says a very interesting thing, and we can talk about it next time. Latin America, we have quite some thoughts about that too, but there's no time anymore. But final thing. So your audience has been great support for our just starting channel that is literally already been messed with by YouTube. It's ridiculous. We're a tiny channel, but they're messing with our stuff already, like taking away likes, taking away subscribers. If it would be great to have some of you subscribe to our BettBeat media channel on YouTube. We are going to try and tie a bit of academic discussions on the psychology of racism, colonialism, but also capitalism, what Peter just talked about, the climate, anything from a socialist, anti-imperialist lens. And we're going to try and create that into a more of a for a general audience to understand. With some videos, with interviews. We had Alsal Rad on. We would talk to Nick, of course. We had a woman who grew up in colonial Indonesia. And slowly we are building that channel, and we can use all the support there is. And your audience is a fantastic audience of Fred Hampton Leftists. So those of you who are interested in that stuff, please join us. And we just created a Substack, like you just said. Let me see. Can I put it in the comments? No. Okay. I'll send it to Nick right now. So Nick, if you can share this.
Yeah, if you put it in the private chat, I'll put it in the chat so they can.
Yeah, I just put it in the private chat.
Okay,
so
give me 1 second. I'll hook you up.
Because and Netter Release has a very good thing. Do you all have Twitter? We are actually not very active on social media because we hate its algorithms. So we need all the help we can get from you guys. So we just started a Substack where we will write articles. Please subscribe and put your email there, and then you will get our articles as a newsletter in your inbox, and we will try and connect the more academic discussions that we have. We try to make that more accessible to a general audience, because I think this is knowledge we need to have also among the boots on the ground leftists, so to speak. So we will talk about like what Peter just did about climate change and the report on the climate change, but we'll talk about how colonialism, white supremacy is a problem all around the world. I will write about that a lot. Psychology of racism, imperialism, and it would be great to have you guys subscribe. You don't have to do anything else. It will just get in your inbox, our articles. If you think, hey, this is an interesting article, share it with your people around you. Share our Substack with people around you, maybe on Twitter, the articles. And that way we can try to get that international alliance, because our problem, Nick, Peter, your audience, is highly similar. We're all in a global system, and we need to understand how we are together in that system and how we can cooperate to find a way out, so to speak. Okay, that's what I wanted to say.
What's that, Karim? I'm gonna give Peter the floor. Final thoughts, anything you want to plug? Make sure I'll put up here. I see you added download Peter's book. Make sure you guys check that out. I know some people were asking about your information, so that's where Peter.
Oh, and about the Substack, we just started. We just started a day ago, so don't think it's full with articles. But you guys will be the first subscribers, and then we try to slowly build it bigger. Okay, that's enough.
Yeah, I'd want to shout out actually a different book, Kwame Nkrumah's book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism. There's a lot of stuff in there you can just not read, because he basically analyzes the ownership structures of all sorts of businesses and natural resources throughout the African continent. And that's dated, but it doesn't matter. You can just skip past that and get to the meat of his argument. Which is that, colonialism never really ended. You have, national flags and national anthems for all of these countries around the world that used to be colonies, but their economic relationships with the global north, with Europe and the US primarily, are still fundamentally the same. The wealth is still being sucked out of Africa, of Latin America, of most of Asia, et cetera. So that's an excellent book. I wish people had been reading that last summer instead of that Robin DiAngelo tripe. But anyway, then if you're interested in media, my book I was basically trying to update manufacturing consent, but add psychology in there to try to explain how you can have a de facto propaganda system without any sort of conscious control, without any top-down control necessarily. So if you're interested if you like manufacturing consent, that's what I was trying to do with that. But the message I wanted to just leave off with is a little more hopeful, in the sense that the public opinion research, there's a book called What Americans Know About Politics and Why It Matters. It's a bit old, but nothing's really changed in the general polling data. People in general in the US, they are very politically ignorant, which I think can be a good thing, because it means that converting them is a little easier. But they're also in general in favor of our left policies. You have majority support for all sorts of things, from letting the United Nations govern the use of force rather than having the US military do so. All sorts of things. We've got our ideas win when we can actually introduce people to them. Our problem is that it's so difficult for people to encounter left-wing ideas. When people ask me, like, where can I go for like a daily news source that you would recommend? It's like, well, I mean, the Financial Times, basically, like that's what I would say for like just news. But for analysis, you've got to go to all sorts of places. You can't just turn on your TV and find something, something informative. So that's a problem. But the bright side is that when people are actually exposed to left ideas, they win. And I can say that from my own experience because I was a super right winger. I was like big into National Review, Rush Limbaugh, etc. When I actually had the time and the opportunity to expose myself to a broad range of ideas, the right wing ideas just don't stand up. They just don't stand up. Try to find a criticism of, say, like Noam Chomsky's foreign policy ideas. Try to find one. He's the most popular left-wing writer on foreign policy. You would think that would attract all of the best minds on the right to try to rip apart his arguments. That's what I was trying to find, because when a friend of mine
They'll just cancel him.
Yeah, they just ignore him. That's really what happens. Nobody
they
gets
do a blackout, a corporate media blackout. People who they can't disprove. They did it to Chris Hedges as well. Chris Hedges and a countless amount of great journalists. But go ahead, Peter. Finish your thought.
So basically, that's the good news, is that when people actually get exposed to left-wing ideas, they win. So we have to just get those ideas out. We have to be like proselytizers. We have to be evangelists, So everyone, do whatever you can to get ideas out into the heads of people who just have never been exposed to it. And I guarantee you're going to find some good results. Like even with my mom, just one last example. Last summer, she watches Fox News. On a family call, she was like, "Oh my God, I hear this crazy stuff about defund the police." I was like, "Yeah, Mom, that does sound crazy. Like, get rid of police. Like, we'd be living in an anarchy, a jungle. You know what we should do instead of defund the police? What we should do instead is we should take money out of police budgets, because police are asked to do all sorts of things, like deal with social problems and domestic disputes and drug abuse or drug addiction. Instead of giving it all to just people with guns, we should take that money and give it to social workers to actually help people." And she was like, "Yeah, that's an idea. We shouldn't be doing defund." And I'm like, "Mom, that is defund the police." So just an example, like, people do like our ideas. The problem is they just are not exposed to them. Don't believe that people have exposure and they've rejected it. That's not the case. All the evidence from public opinion research shows that that's not the case. People have not been exposed to it. That's our job.
That's well said, and that's exactly the kind of information we're trying to get out there. And that's why I was relentless on hitting the propaganda that, once again, we got another wave, and we're going to talk about that on Thursday. I think Sabrina, I saw someone in the chat mention Savvy Sass from Fred and Leftists. She covered that a little bit today on her show. But this is why the conversation is so important. We got to debunk propaganda, capitalist, imperialist propaganda, and that's why I appreciate having you guys on. And make sure you guys check out the YouTube. I got everything linked in the descriptions. I linked the Substack. Now, if you guys, I'm gonna put the subscription when on the replay. But you also can check out through the live chat. You can always find the links as well. So make sure you guys support. And tomorrow, like I always say, if there's one stream you can't miss on that Fred Hampton Left, this our Thursday roundtable, because that's when we usually have multiple hosts. And like you guys watch their individual shows where you watch Sabrina Sabbs. CJ is killing the game on Straight Out Politics, and we have Killjoy Guide from Meg. We usually have a combination of all of our hosts come together on Thursday. That's why it's our big show. Like that's like our official show. That's tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys check that out. That tends to be the show that people look forward to most because we all are on camera. But make sure you guys check out Karim and Peter. Thank you guys for coming on once again. Support us on Ko-fi and enjoy, like, subscribe, and show some love. Anyway, this is Fred Hampton Leftist. Sign out. Thank you guys.
Peace.
Peace.